presented on the military in Zimbabwe and how they function, their role they play within the Zimbabwean state. I basically tried to shed light on how the military is very influential in how things work in Zimbabwe. I used the example of how President Mugabe was removed by the military, and that then saw the new president come in MSM Mnangagwa. I think if our governments can be held accountable more, and we emphasize the importance of constitutionalism. Governments need to be reminded that it is the constitution that is above everything. It is above the army, it is above the president, it is above the cabinet. It is always about the constitution. So I'll be speaking about the militarization of the Zimbabwean state. As many of you know, in 2017 in November, Zimbabwe's longtime serving president, Robert Mugabe, was removed by the army. The general argument I tried to make with my paper is to argue that that process didn't just happen, in that period. It's been a long drawn process within Zimbabwe's history, dating back from the liberation struggle till 2017, when he eventually was taken out by the army. So in this brief presentation, I'll sort of try to show how the state in Zimbabwe has been militarized. Okay. So as you can see with that picture, I think on the 17th of November, around about that time, Zimbabweans gathered into the street to support the army in what the army labeled as a military-assisted transition, which means it's a military coup. But then, just like many things in Zimbabwe, there's a currency that's not a currency. In this case, there was a coup that wasn't a coup, right? They titled it Operation Restore Legacy, and this was to remove the criminals that were surrounding President Mugabe at the time. So as you can see with this picture, there's the Army General Constantino Chiwenga, who led this process. And as you can see, the people were obviously backing the army in removing President Mugabe. So one of the arguments I make was that the removal of Mugabe was not necessarily to target the criminals, but rather it was more of the army trying to strengthen their stranglehold on the Zimbabwean state. As you can see here, I've quoted the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Section 213, which speaks of the deployment of defense forces. And it clearly states that the president, in his capacity as the commander-in-chief, is the one who has the authority to place the military, be it on the street or to fight in another country. But in this case, Mugabe actually apparently didn't know what was happening until eventually he was told that this is what had happened. So in that case, I don't know, it seems to me that it looks like a military coup, therefore I might think it is a military coup, but that's up to you guys to also help me decide. And I would like to proceed to discuss the military and the role that it plays in Zimbabwe. Right. A number of authors all agree that the military has always played a role in Zimbabwean politics. So, for instance, the then general of the army in 2002 was very clear. He stated that the defense forces would not accept a leader that did not fight in the liberation struggle. That basically meant that at the time, when Morgan Tsvangirai was running for the presidency in 2002, he would not be allowed to win because they felt that he didn't have the necessary credentials. In actual fact, they were saying that even if he wins, he would never be president. This is how the Zimbabwean state is run. If you look at a number of other military officials, you find that they occupy very strong positions. Could be in the media, could be in business. So for instance, if you look at natural resources, for example, with the discovery of diamonds that happened in 2006, the military was heavily involved, in the extraction of those natural resources. So you see that the military has sort of been involved in the governing of Zimbabwe. Another important thing to notice when we look at the Zimbabwean state, the second last point there, I state that in Zimbabwe, for example, there are certain aspects we see that, there are regular competitive elections between the government and the opposition, but because the lines between the state and the actual government within Zimbabwe are blurred, so we see, ZANU-PF as a political party, as well as ZANU-PF as the government, it's one and the same thing. So dismantling that is a bit difficult, but it's even made more worse because of the role that the army has played within Zimbabwe, dating back again, like I said, to 1980. So if you look at, for example, at the June 2008 elections, what had happened with the June 2008 election was that there was a first round of election that had happened on the 29th of March in 2008. But because of the fact that there wasn't an outright winner, they then had to go to a second round of election. In this second round of election, the army was very influential in maintaining Mugabe's stranglehold on Zimbabwe's political scene. So this was mainly done through the last point there, where I state that there was the Joint Operations Command, which is a military body that comprises of the heads of all security organs, the army, the Air Force, prison service, and intelligence, and the police as well. These were very instrumental in ensuring that President Mugabe would stay in power. And another thing as well, many authors also note that under Mugabe, Zimbabwe became a de facto military state led by de jure civilian authority. Okay. So looking at the June 2008 election, it is important to note that the army, like I said earlier, played a very important role. So for example, some of the people who were campaigning for the second round of elections would have, I would say like a lot of disturbing things about the role that the army plays. For example, I will refer you to the fourth point there. Major General Rugeje states that this country came through the bullet, not the pencil. Therefore, it will not go by your X of the pencil, right? Mugabe himself says that we fought for this country and a lot of blood was shed. We're not going to give up our country because of a mere X. How can a ballpoint fight with a gun? Right? These are some of the rhetorics that these people were talking about during that election time. You find that the role of the army, again, shows, it's quite evident for people to see, because it was at the forefront of ensuring that, their interests were protected. Right. So now Zimbabwe has a new president in Emmerson Mnangagwa, right? And my belief, and what I try to show in this paper, is that Mnangagwa, just like Mugabe, now sort of represents the interests of the Zimbabwean military. When Mugabe failed to represent the interests of the military, they removed him and placed someone who could also, represent them and, further their agenda. There are a lot of examples that prove this. So, for example, if you look at right now, if you look at President Mnangagwa's cabinet, the vice president is a retired army general. The minister of foreign affairs is also an retired army general as well. If you look at, I think the minister of local government also comes from the army. So you find that the army is involved in the day-to-day running of the Zimbabwean state. So what Mnangagwa's rise to power shows us that, the Zimbabwean state, again, I keep re-emphasizing the fact that it is militarized. So, for example, if you look at the elections that were previously held, we saw what I can say, the violent nature of ZANU-PF on the 1st of August when people were shot in the street. There's actually, I'm happy my colleague who spoke about Gambia also spoke about a commission of inquiry. That also was a commission of inquiry by the president of Zimbabwe, where he's trying to see who called the army to go onto the street. Yet we know that the constitution is clear as to who actually called the army. So it's very interesting to see what's going to come out of this commission of inquiry. But more importantly, again, what that showed was that ZANU-PF as a political party can no longer thrive without the use of violence. So every time they feel threatened, so be it in an election, like what happened in 2008, and what happened earlier, what happened in August, when they feel threatened, they always resort to their default settings, which is the use of violence. Right? And what's also complicated the scenario is the political economy of Zimbabwe, where the army, I think, dating back to 1998, with the war in the DRC, the army in Zimbabwe, and I hear that Mnangagwa as well was very influential in involving the army in the DRC because they were promised natural resources of some kind. And we see that again happening in Zimbabwe itself with the Marange diamonds, that also showed again that the military always has a vested interest within the Zimbabwean state. Okay. And then I direct you to this picture here. This picture again sort of sums up, the Zimbabwean state again. So over there we have three, I think, individuals really associated with Zimbabwe's history. So we have Robert Mugabe, the former president, and we have Emmerson Mnangagwa as well, who's there. This again, we see the military element that comes out of, the Zimbabwean state and the Zimbabwean nature of politics, where the army plays an important role. So I'd move to my closing remarks. And in my closing remarks, I just want to note that the politicization of the Zimbabwean state dates back to the liberation struggle, which was fought and brought independence in 1980. Right, but more importantly, what we see with the militarization of the Zimbabwean state, it only really came to the fore in the early 2000s. And you ask yourself, why is that the scenario? And it goes back to what I said earlier, where I said when ZANU-PF feels threatened, you find that the violent nature then sort of comes out. So you find that the armies then in the early 2000s, because they were under threat from the opposition party that had just come up, Movement for Democratic Change, we then see that the army then sort of stepped up to protect its interests, which was obviously Robert Mugabe. So I'll draw you to the second last point there by a gentleman called, I think, Ruanya, who writes a lot about the Zimbabwean military. He says that, so in the end, the military captured the state and its institutions, as well as ZANU-PF process, making it easier for Mugabe to be overthrown in November last year, as this Frankenstein monster turned against him. So in situations where Mugabe felt that, he was threatened, his power base was under threat, the army would always come in to sort of protect him and, and save him, basically. And it's very interesting to see that it is the same army that also played the role in ensuring that he was removed because their interests were no longer protected. Thank you very much. My name is Gwinyai Tavuringa. I am from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. I do a lot of things there. So firstly, I'm an educator. So I tutor third-year politics. I basically help them, bridge the gap between themselves and the lecturer. So the courses I take, there's one called Comparative Politics in Africa that looks at the African continent, basically looking at how the continent works in terms of political processes, electoral processes, and just how democracy works on the African continent. The second course I teach is also called the African State, which is also similar to conflict in Africa. I'm also a PhD candidate. I am focusing my research on water governance in Zimbabwe. Though my topic looks at Zimbabwe, I basically try to cover the whole African continent to sort of shed light on water shortages, issues of sanitation, how they affect the African continent. In terms of what I presented today, it was totally unrelated to my topic. I presented on the military in Zimbabwe and how they function, their role they play within the Zimbabwean state. Basically tried to shed light on how the military is very influential in how things work in Zimbabwe. I used the example of how President Mugabe was removed by the military, and that then saw the new president come in Emmerson Mnangagwa. I think if you look at the APRM, one of the things they talk about is good governance. And for me, good governance starts with the Constitution. So I'm of the belief that if our governments, adhere to and take to heart what the Constitution says, be it in relation to elections, be it in just how they handle themselves, how, in terms of accountability to the citizenry, I think if our governments can be held accountable more, and we emphasize the importance of constitutionalism. Governments need to be reminded that it is the Constitution that is above everything. It is above the army, it is above the president, it is above the cabinet. It is always about the Constitution. So that is the main recommendation I could give, not only to Zimbabwe but for the African continent. I think in relation to sustainable development, one of the things I've seen in terms of academia is and in academia, we contribute differently. So for instance, in myself, I contribute like to natural resources and issues of governance, and we can come together and see where we can contribute, because everyone has something they can contribute, because people are doing issues in sport, everyone plays sport in Africa, issues relating to gender, population studies, these are all sort of intertwined, and we can sort of come together and see where we can contribute together.